Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I'm Damon Martin.
And I'm Patrick Guerra.
And Patrick, we are back for the attack with another Scream film, which is undeniably, going to be one of the biggest horror films of 2023. And I'll be honest, you know my love of this franchise, probably my most anticipated horror film of 2023. We're only in March, and we already get one of those films. But Scream 6 has arrived. You and I both went to an early screening, and here we are to talk about it. Spoiler-free for the opening of the show, and then we'll get into spoilers a little later because there's so much of this movie that just relies on spoilers because this was a pretty crazy film.
Scream is back, bigger and badder than ever, and in the Big Apple, right? I like to believe I coined the phrase "Ghostface takes Manhattan," which is indeed what this movie's all about. I gotta say, man, I think Scream 6 has gone all out. Now we'll wait till the spoiler section before we determine whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I don't even know where to start, Damon, to be honest with you, because as far as sequels go, we're talking about the sixth in the series of this legendary slasher series, Scream. And I feel like this is the biggest, the baddest they've ever made one. The scale of this thing feels enormous.
It's funny because, there were a lot of concerns from the fan base, at least in terms of like the Scream fan base. How would you adapt a Ghostface killing in New York? Because so much of everything that this franchise has largely been centered around has been, Woodsboro and kind of the small town feel of it. And the one film that really went outside of that is Scream 3, which took place in Los Angeles. And that is typically the least liked, film in the entire series. It took place in Los Angeles on basically a Hollywood film set. So a lot of people were concerned, like, how do you do a Ghostface killing in the middle of New York City with a million people, millions of people around? You're rarely by yourself in New York City ever. Like even at 2 o'clock in the morning walking around the streets, there's still thousands of people out there. So how do you orchestrate it? And I got to give credit where credit's due because I was like, this is going to be interesting. Like I was curious how they were going to pull it off. And I gotta say, one of my favorite aspects of this sequel was the setting in New York City. It really worked.
That's where everything is. That's what it's all about. I'm a sucker for New York movies. So I think I was always going to have a little bit of bias coming in because I want to see movies that are set in New York. And there's tons of like little micro references to Jason Takes Manhattan in this movie. I feel like the Radio Silence people were like, let's show you how like a slasher should have been done in New York. And I think that in that respect, they like 100% achieve it. This is tricky because I'm like dancing around so much because I feel like spoilers are abound, and we probably need to get into spoilers earlier than we normally do. But I can say right off the top that this is a movie that uses New York really wisely. I don't know how to say it without spoiling the movie, but they crafted a movie where you do suspect everyone and anyone in this movie, including our main cast of characters. They do a really good job of shaping all of that. This idea of like, I can't trust anyone. And when I mean anyone, Damon, I'm talking anyone. As a diehard Scream fan, now you've been with the franchise since day one. What were your like initial like kind of just emotional reactions to Scream 6?
It was I went in like I didn't go in. A lot of people said they went in with low expectations because it's the first film without Neve Campbell, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, we should talk about that.
That's one non-spoiler part we can talk about. But a lot of people were concerned, like how do you move beyond Sidney Prescott? She is the final girl. She is the center of this franchise. So, but a lot of people went in with low expectations. I'll be honest, Patrick, I went in with very high expectations because this franchise has consistently delivered. And as we said during our Scream 2 review, even the films that aren't as great in this series are still pretty good. I've said that like numerous times, and that's a high compliment for horror sequels because I both know that pretty good is a high bar to set for some horror sequels. So even the worst Scream films, which I hate to use the word worst because that sounds like it's bad. It's not. Like
right.
The worst ones are still pretty good. So I actually went with high expectations, and I'll be honest, like right away. And again, no spoilers here. The opening scene in this film, which we all know the cold open in Scream films are iconic. From Casey Becker, with Drew Barrymore in the first one all the way through Scream 5 with Jenna Ortega in the opening scene. The opening scene in Scream films really do set the tone for the entire film. And I gotta be honest, and listen, I'll be honest. Maybe I'm being a little prisoner of the moment because I just saw it, hours ago, really, at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being a little prisoner of the moment. But I'll be honest, Patrick, I think this opening in Scream 6 is my favorite opening beyond the first one. Obviously, Casey Becker, Drew Barrymore, iconic. That'll never be topped. That's probably one of the top 10 opening scenes in film history, not just horror film history. It's one of the most opening scenes. Setting that aside, honestly, I think this opening scene may be my second favorite in the entire franchise.
I might be right there with you without spoiling anything. It is interesting because the one thing it kind of amazes me about the Scream franchise is that it does not divert from its formula. It's going to use the cold opening. Like we're not going to talk about who's in the cold opening yet because we're not in spoilers, but it's someone that and then so they're going to die. Or at least now they subverted that in Scream 5. We saw Jenna Ortega. We figured she's going to die. They subverted that expectation. Did they subvert it here? They kind of do in a really strange way, in a really interesting way. So despite the fact that they're using the exact same formula every single Scream, the opening is the same every single time, they still manage to subvert expectations. Will they do that across the whole movie? We're going to have to wait for spoilers to find out. But I did love that cold opening because it really got me. It really pulled the rug out from under me. That's what you want. And if you're sitting here only listening to the non-spoiler stuff first, you will get that feeling right at the top, right at the very beginning of this movie. You're going to be like, oh shit, I didn't see that coming. Because it really, like, at one point I was like, that to me seems like a very obvious thing. Why are they being so obvious? And then the scene kind of keeps going and you're like, holy shit, okay, no, I didn't see that coming at all. And that's what you want. That's what good horror does, is it blindsides you. And that's exactly what the cold open of this movie does. It blindsides you. And then the story that lays out in front of us, I mean, without getting into too much of a spoiler, obviously is going to focus on Sam Carpenter, played by Melissa Barrera, who I think actually finally gets to kind of come out in the light because of what you mentioned earlier, which is this is the first movie without Sidney Prescott in it. So Neve Campbell's not there. It feels like Sam's movie finally. She's not living in the shadow of Sidney Prescott at all. Now we're really focused on her story. Now, of course, we're going to have some legacy characters. There's no spoiler about that. You see Gail Weathers, played by Courtney Cox, in the trailer. So she's going to be in the movie. How she plays a role in it is, well, I don't know. Is it classic Gail? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say it's very classic Gail, actually. They continue to write that character very well, based even on the very first film. Like, Gail's character has evolved, but she's still very much the same Gail. And they do get that right in a lot of ways. So it's a very, very well written film. And real quick on the opening, just going back to that real quick, like, credit to the writers. I mentioned their names at the beginning. Credit to them for pulling this off because it is such a unique and different way to tackle the opening. And then from there, now let's just talk about the Neve Campbell of it all, because when this film originally got announced and we did a quick little reaction to everything in the trailer and everything, we talked about Neve Campbell not returning. Now, Neve Campbell didn't return, as I mentioned in the opening, because of financial reasons. She didn't like the financial package. They were offering her to do this sixth film, and so she passed on it. And everyone stood by her. Everyone in the cast stood by her. But obviously the show has to go on. And I said at the time, you will not find, of course, I am the Scream guy on this podcast. I love Scream. I have a huge attachment to Scream. So part of me was like, man, this sucks, because she has been, in the center of every single Scream film, even through Scream 5. And I was like, man, that sucks. But then at the same time, if a franchise is going to exist and continue to 6, 7, 8 films, at some point you have to be able to move on. You have to be able to move on to new characters and get us to care about new characters. So in a weird way, I was like, okay, the franchise has to eventually move beyond Sidney Prescott. This is the chance to do it. And I think they executed it rather brilliantly in this film. Now, that being said, I will add that Sidney gets mentioned in this film. They're not just ignoring her existence in this film, but she's not the center of this. And I will say that if Sidney comes back for Scream 7, they do strike a deal and she comes back, because I think we all know there's going to be a Scream 7. I think it would be good, because one film away from her and focusing on the other characters allowed them to lead, allowed the story to move beyond just Sidney Prescott. And again, let me be clear. I love Sidney Prescott. I love Neve Campbell. I would have loved if she was here. I hate that the reason she's not here is simply coming down to pay, and they wouldn't up the ante to bring back the series star. That bugs me. But, and I'm saying this, with that preface, I actually kind of like that they moved beyond Sidney in this film, because it allowed us, as you mentioned, to focus on Melissa Barrera's character, to focus on Jenna Ortega's character, to focus on Jasmine Savoy Brown and Mason Gooding's character, all the characters who were in Scream 5 who then moved to New York in Scream 6, they become the center and the focus. And while Gail Weathers, Courtney Cox, is there, she's not the center of this. She's not suddenly the star just because she's the legacy character coming back. In a lot of ways, she's very much a supporting character to our new characters, or I should say returning characters from Scream 5. My point being here, Patrick, is the story does it and executes it in such a way that Sidney doesn't need to be there, and it allows Sam and Tara particularly to shine and move the story beyond that. Now, if Sidney does come, here's what I love about this real quick. If Sidney does come back in Scream 7, we've now established Sam and Tara as the leads of the Scream franchise. She comes back, it's almost like, it's like getting it's like getting a shot of espresso and you're already potent coffee. I hate coffee, but that's a good
right.
You already got a great cup of coffee. You drop in the espresso to really jump to supercharge it. That's kind of what it would be like, in my opinion, if Neve Campbell does end up returning for Part 7.
It is like bringing Michael Keaton back into the DC universe, which is what they're about to do. It's very much that. And I gotta give them big credit here for being as respectful of her absence as possible. They don't write her off as a joke. They treat her character like she's still part of the universe very much, without giving anything away, and just saying she's not going to be here this time. And then it's just all the focus is on Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega's character, the Carpenter sisters. And this is not spoilery, but it is interesting that we're kind of moving on. We passed the torch in Scream 5. We passed the torch with some very interesting baggage, right? Now, Sidney's always had baggage. That's how we started this franchise. Sam is no different. Sam is the daughter of Billy Loomis. We established that in Scream 5. There's no spoiler here unless you haven't seen Scream 5, which, why are you listening to the Scream 6 podcast if that's the case? Sam is Billy Loomis's daughter. And not only is she Billy Loomis's daughter, she's haunted by his presence. Okay, so he actually talks to her, he speaks to her, and that's an issue, right? We learned that in Scream 5. And we also learned that she might even, in Scream 5, have the tendencies of a psychotic killer, right? It's all in the family. That's kind of how they're playing with that game. So that's carrying over into this film in its own unique way, in its own interesting way. Just off the top, and let's talk about it like we're talking about Scream 5 and not necessarily Scream 6 before, because I feel like we got to get into spoilers here soon, because it's just, there's too much to talk about. How do you feel that our new lead, Sam Carpenter, now that we've passed the torch to her, but that setup, that deep down she could be a psycho killer too, and she's always going to have Billy Loomis on her shoulder? How does that make you feel? Because that is a very, how do I put it, incestuous story device to use him constantly. Like, he will always be part of this movie as long as the Carpenter sisters are a part of this movie.
I'll be honest, one of the biggest criticisms I had in Scream 5, and if you go back and listen to our podcast a year ago, I said that while I appreciate what they were doing with the whole Billy Loomis reveal with being Sam's father, they also, it feels like you're rewriting history a little bit too much. That was probably the biggest mistake that Scream 3 made, when they tried to rewrite history a little bit too much. And it's just like, all right, come on, you're just making us suspend disbelief a little bit too much here to actually, feel like this could have happened. But the way they carry it forward into Scream 6, I actually really enjoy it, because it doesn't weigh down the plot as much as it did in Part 5. It was such a huge part of part 5 that it felt like they got lost a little bit too much in the whole Billy. We got to bring back Billy Loomis. How could
Yeah.
here's how we did it, and it just felt like it weighed down the movie a little bit, and it never allowed us to really care as much about Sam Carpenter. With this one, I like the trauma that she's dealing with, because imagine, like I said, it's one thing if you grew up with a father who you later found out was a serial killer, and we know real life people go through that all the time, sadly. But finding out at, whatever she's supposed to be in these films, 23, 24 years old, finding out that you are the daughter of a very notorious serial killer, and she finds out at whatever, 17 or 16 when she's a kid and she's grown up now. Living with that secret and living with that torment in your head that you never knew your father, but you know his legacy. And that, I think, makes this so much more real, because if you are the daughter of a serial killer, you grow up with him and you find out your dad's a serial killer, it's pretty traumatic, but you still remember your dad for being your dad. Now, I'm not saying serial killers are all good dads. I'm saying, like, I've read stories or seen documentaries where, kids of killers, parents, they're like, I didn't know, like, he was a normal dad or whatever. Or maybe they grew up in an abusive household, sadly. Those kind of things happen. So you have a certain impression of him or her when all the crimes are revealed. In this case, she never knew Billy. The vision we see of Billy in Scream 5 is just her head. Like, it's just her head. Like, she's imagining what her serial killer father would say to her. Because, like I said, that to me is even more terrifying, because you don't know what kind of guy he was. All you know are the stories you're being told. All you know is people telling you he's this evil, wickedly evil, terrible person who killed a bunch of people and tried to kill his girlfriend and blah, blah. I mean, awful things, and that's all you know about him. And then that's your legacy. That's the legacy you carry on now that you're his daughter, is that you are the daughter of one of the most notorious serial killers of all time, and you got to start wondering, like, did that get passed along to me? We all know the serial killer gene, the DNA thing is out there. That's a very prominent story. You can look it up. Like, those are things that she's dealing with. And on top of this, she dealt with that trauma all on her own for, we have to imagine, a 6, 7, 5, I think they said 5 years she was away from Tara. So for the better part of 5 years, she was away from her sister, dealing with this internally all by herself. And that's a lot to take in. And then we see the aftermath of that. Now that her secret's been revealed in Scream 6, everyone knows that she is Billy Loomis's daughter. That also comes, there's a reason why, just recently, just recently, maybe you saw in the news, one of the members of the Manson family, the one who testified against the Manson family and was eventually released, she died. And the only reason they knew she died is because I guess family members finally realized. But she had changed her name, she changed her, she changed her look. She tried to escape that past, because you'll never escape that legacy, right? And so now that people know who she is, imagine walking around with that dark cloud hanging over your head. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and maybe that's a good point for us to probably roll into spoilers. Don't you agree?
One thing I want to point out real quick before we get spoilers. They've said a lot in this lead up about this being a different Ghostface, a different brutal Ghostface.
Right, yeah. Ghostface.
Without spoiling anything, this is, in my opinion, the most brutal and goriest Scream film. And that's not a spoiler. They've said that a lot. They've said that a lot in the teasers and the interviews and things like that. This is different. And even, like, that was the one, I'll be honest, that was the one aspect going into the film where I was a little skeptical. I was like, all right, sure, it's the most gory. Like,
yeah, I've heard it before.
You're trying to sell me on a film. You don't need to sell me. It worked. It paid off, man. This was the most brutal, goriest Ghostface, nastiest Ghostface of the series, without a doubt, since the first one. I mean, this one was a promise that delivered.
Yes, yeah, I would say bigger and badder Ghostface in all respects in that way, because I don't even remember necessarily. I mean, there's a couple of good, like, gory and kill scenes in Scream 5, but yeah, it makes Scream 2, which we just talked about, I mean, like a kid's show. I mean, this one goes hard, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I really did. And like I said, we talked about, if you go back and listen to our Scream 2 podcast, Wes Craven had to make a lot of edits to that movie because the Motion Picture Association,
yeah,
MPAA, the people who basically give ratings to movies, they made him make 8 edits to get Scream 2 down to R-rated. And when you watch Scream 2 now, you're like, this is a pretty tame like horror film by all like by today's standards. Like as I'm
Very much, yeah.
As I'm sitting here in my Terrifier 2 T-shirt, yeah, this is pretty tame by those standards. So we've come a long way since then. So Scream 6, credit to the filmmakers, they didn't just make it gory for the sake of being gory, but this is a more brutal, gory film. And I appreciate that, because if there's one maybe complaint or one minor, quibble, so to speak, with the franchise, people that are into gore, they're into, as Randy Meeks called it in Scream 2, carnage candy. You get that in this film in spades. I mean, it really does happen throughout the film.
Yeah, absolutely. Get ready for blood and guts. It's coming to New York City.
All right. We're going to get into spoilers now as we also get into categories. So, again, if you haven't seen Scream 6, it's out in theaters now. We always release these podcasts a few days after. We imagine the majority of horror fans are probably sprinting to the theater to see this thing on opening weekend. But if you haven't seen it, obviously you can tell by our earlier review that you and I both like this film a lot. I think that's fair to say. I would say that, and just to be completely honest, I would say I like Scream 6 more than Scream 5.
Yes.
I think this was a better overall film and a better overall story. Would you agree?
I 100% agree. And now that we're in spoiler categories, it is because Melissa Barrera's character, Sam Carpenter, could step out of Sidney Prescott's shadow and be the fully fleshed character. We're not being pulled from both worlds. You had to spend half of Scream 5 kind of reintroducing the legacy characters. I mean, that was just part of the deal. And that's okay. I mean, we all wanted that. We wanted to see the old gang back together, at least for one last ride. No spoiler there, but a few people don't make it out of that anyway. Fucking R.I.P. Dewey, justice for Dewey. Anyway, Damon, I thought that this movie did something super, super clever. Is it took what happened in Scream 5, which is Sam Carpenter realizing that her boyfriend Richie and a girl he never knew about were actually these psycho fans, these toxic fans who were kind of obsessed with the Woodsboro murders, and they used her to get to Woodsboro and to kill a bunch of people and to kind of recreate the original Woodsboro murders. Sam doles out her justice. She kills her boyfriend, and then she moves to New York City to literally just blend in. Actually, it sort of seems puzzling, but the best way to blend in after something so crazy and so insane like that happens is to probably go to a place like New York City where there's 18 million people on the street. Most celebrities like to live in New York City because most people don't care that you're walking around. There's just too many people for them to give a shit. Well, in the internet age, if you're as notorious as Sam Carpenter is, being attached to this insane murder that happened in her hometown, conspiracy theories abound. There's this online conspiracy that says actually it's Sam that orchestrated everything and framed her boyfriend for those murders. Now, in years past, that would have seemed a little weird, wouldn't it? It would have seemed like that doesn't really hold water as a plot. Well, nowadays, we see what conspiracy theories can do without getting into any of that discussion. Conspiracy theories plague Sam Carpenter. So even in New York City, when she walks around, everyone seems to think that she is a full-blown serial killer. What do you think of this?
I love that aspect, and you're absolutely right. This could have felt very cheap, but in reality, it actually felt very real, because this is the world we're
felt of the times.
Yeah, this is 2023. I mean, this is like rumors start all the time. Again, we all know the story. I'm not getting into politics. We all know the story that happened with Nancy Pelosi's husband getting attacked, and all the millions of false stories that came out there about that, and everyone kind of freaking out and went nuts about that. So this very much plays into that, that kind of a story with that conspiracy at the center of it. And really, the sisters moved to New York, to try to escape. Obviously Jenna Ortega's character Tara is going to college, and Sam basically follows her there to look after her sister. But she can't leave her legacy behind. She can't leave the legacy of being Billy Loomis's daughter behind. And immediately when this rumor starts, it just kind of ruins her life. Like everyone is kind of looking over their shoulder. There's things on Twitter and Instagram, and everyone's saying she's the real killer. And some people are celebrating it like she's this icon of murder, and then other people are like, you framed Richie and Amber. That they were wronged, and you did this wrong. And it's a really interesting flip on how this happens, because when Sidney in the original Scream kills Billy and Stu, they didn't say, "Oh, well, you were in on it." You were in on it. Like they didn't. Back then, it didn't make sense. She was the victim. She was the final girl. In a lot, Sam is the final girl. Yet she's being condemned as the one of the killers. It's a really, to me again, it's a really really smart play on 2023 as it is. This is something that 100% would happen in this day and age.
It felt really timely. Now there could be a drawback to that. Maybe in 10 years it won't age well. They'll go like, what? Like, what do you mean? And I'll go, yeah, no, trust me. 10 years ago, this could work. This plot could totally work 10 years ago, and it made total sense. But as of right now, it feels incredibly timely. So as crazy as that sounds, where if she walks into a party and people see her, they're like, oh, you're the killer. And like, they like actively don't like her. Now in a city of 14 million people who all believe she's a serial killer, that's kind of insanity. It makes her life a living hell. And she still is very much haunted by the presence of her father, Billy Loomis. And I thought there was something very interesting, is that very early in the movie, she's sitting down with a therapist who she hasn't opened up to for 6 months. And then when she finally breaks through, very conveniently during our movie that we're sitting down and watching, she finally admits that she might have actually kind of liked killing Richie. And so what does that do? That immediately sets up, okay, so we know this conspiracy that's going on. We know how she feels about what happened with her and Richie. Right away, it makes her a suspect, which is crazy interesting, because we're talking about a very big cast. I think this time around, this feels like one of the bigger casts. I feel like Scream 4 also had like a massive cast.
Yeah.
Scream 6 is loaded with people. It's almost hard to keep up, but not. I think they do a really good job with that. But to establish right away that I have to think about it pretty closely, that maybe Sam is the killer. This is what you come to Scream for. What you come to Scream for is to believe that anyone and everyone in this movie could be the killer. And Damon, in my opinion, we're talking, Melissa Carpenter, Jenna Ortega, Jasmine Savoy Brown, Mason Gooding, Hayden Panettiere's back, by the way. Some newcomers like Josh Segarra, Devin Nakota, Jack Champion, Liana Liberato, Tony Revolori. You think all these people could be the killer? All of them. Like, I'm fully convinced at any point in time in this movie that someone could be the killer. And what I loved was there was this constant push and pull, this misdirect. And it all started with Sam's idea of like, hey, maybe I did like killing him. What do you think about all that? Because to me, that's what makes Scream good. You have to believe that anybody could be the killer. And this movie sets it up perfectly.
Yeah, the whole Randy idea of everybody's a suspect, which is a famous line he screams in the original Scream, really sets it up well, because from then on out you are suspecting everybody. There's a moment in Scream 3, I believe it is, where they're like, what if the killer's Sidney Prescott? Like they kind of question that for the first time. In Scream 2,
right,
when Randy and Dewey sit down, he's like, what about Gail Weathers? Like, she's creating her own sequel. And you kind of think for a second, like, well, that's not that crazy, because if you get to fame and fortune, and you've kind of made your career off of these murders, like, wouldn't you want to keep it going? So yeah, like the whole, and setting it up to where Sam is kind of haunted by her past, haunted by the legacy of her father, and haunted by the idea that she actually didn't feel remorse for killing Richie, but actually enjoyed it. Which, again, we can sit here and talk about the psychological effects of that, because, a guy who's trying to murder you, you probably do feel some satisfaction in killing them, but like to actually enjoy it, like that's a different feeling. And she's starting to question, like, did she enjoy it too much? Was it more than just revenge for this guy, attacking her sister, killing her friends? Did it feel better than it should feel? And so she's questioning herself at every turn, and you start to wonder, like, could she be capable of these murders? And one thing that the Scream franchise has attacked very, very well throughout the franchise is the everyone's a suspect idea. They never abandon that, and you do have your sensors, your radars on the entire time. Now, what I love about this, and again, just to be fair, we are in spoilers, folks. So if you're kind of worried, we are in spoilers. So we're going to talk about big spoilers now. So again, be aware if you haven't seen Scream 6, go see it, or just understand we're about to get into some serious spoilers. The killer reveal in this film, while again, here's what I like about the killer reveal in this film. The big killer reveal in the final setup is that this is Richie's family coming back for revenge on Sam Carpenter for killing their son. It's his dad and his siblings, his brother and sister. 3 Ghostface, which is the first time ever for the franchise. Here's what I liked about that, though. This was about Sam. This didn't have to tie back to Sidney. And that's what I talked about earlier. This franchise has moved beyond Sidney. This directly tied to what happened in Scream 5. It's Richie's family coming back for revenge on Sam. Very Scream 2-esque, with Nancy Loomis coming back to avenge her son.
Very.
I love that, because any other version, now again, there's going to be a lot of people who went in, myself included, thinking, I know there's this huge online rumor Stu Macher was going to come back. Matthew Lillard was going to come back. There's been a long-standing rumor that Stu was going to come back in these sequels. Now, while some Scream fans might be disappointed to know that Stu isn't back, I said this to you off-air last night when we talked about it briefly, and I'll say it today on air. You can't have Stu come back unless Sidney's there. There's no payoff without Stu and Sidney. If you're going to bring back Matthew Lillard as Stu Macher, Neve Campbell / Sidney Prescott has to be there. It doesn't make sense otherwise. So the fact that Sidney's not there, so you eliminate Stu Macher right away. You can't bring him back in this film because it doesn't pay off in the same way if Sidney's not there. So they move to the other choice, which is Sam. Who did Sam kill? She killed her boyfriend. Her boyfriend was Richie Kirsch. Boom. That's the legacy character getting carried forward, and that's how these killers find their motivation. And to me, Patrick, I absolutely loved it, because if you're going to move beyond Sidney, you got to move beyond Sidney. You got to focus on the new characters, and Sam has plenty of baggage of her own that you can focus on.
Sam has all the baggage you need to perfectly pass the torch from Sidney Prescott. If Neve Campbell, and this would be criminal, but if Neve Campbell never returns to the series, we're good. We're good. We have all the baggage we need, because A, we've set up that conspiracies say she definitely framed her boyfriend for these murders, and now B, the reveal is, well, it's actually Richie's family came back to seek revenge on her. Turns out she kills them too. So that conspiracy can persist into the future if it wants to, and you still have Billy Loomis looming over her shoulder, if you will. And I love the little thing where you were talking about Stu. I love there was a little back and forth between Kirby and Mindy Meeks, of course, played by Jasmine Savoy Brown. Kirby, of course, returning character Hayden Panettiere, returning as that character as an FBI agent now, who, of course, specializes in the Woodsboro murders. They have this little back and forth where they're talking movie talk, and there's a lot of great movie talk in this outing of the franchise, and I absolutely loved it. It might have been some of my favorite. But there's one thing that Mindy says that I absolutely loved. Kirby brings up Stu Macher, and Mindy goes, "If you believe he's dead." And I love that they just sprinkled that in there. They go, if we can pull this off, if we can make sense down the line, you can probably see Stu Macher alive again. I fucking loved that, because it gave us hope without ever having to hammer us over the head with anything. It gives us hope that Stu Macher could still be back. And you're 100% right. You can't have Stu Macher come back without Sidney Prescott. There would be no point. Because colliding those characters one last time would be an amazing thing to do. Maybe we can get a little redemption for the Star Wars. I don't want to get into Star Wars right now, but maybe we could get a little redemption for those legacy characters kind of coming back together for one last moment. This movie does a ton of great things that I absolutely loved. One of the biggest things was, and I keep harking back to this because I think it's important. it really emphasizes that the media, that social media, and just this idea of muddying the water, muddying the story to the point that everyone can be guilty. I fucking love that. Because when Kirby returns, right? So another legacy character comes back. When Kirby returns, there's a little sprinkle of the idea that maybe she's the one doing all of this, and it makes total sense that she would do all of this. Damon, I loved that I could not figure out for the fucking life of me, no matter how many great diatribes Mindy could go on about sequels and requels and remakes and franchises, or this one, or the new mysterious boyfriend, or the girlfriend, or the roommate, or the cop, or the FBI agent. I could not fucking figure this thing out, Damon. By the time that killer reveal happens, Richie's family, I was like, and I'm gonna, I think, temper my thoughts on the reveal itself, because we'll have a discussion about that at the end. I was just so impressed that I could not fucking figure this thing out. No, normally I go, yeah, I'm narrowing it down to these people. And every time I narrowed it down, something in this movie would pull me in a new direction. That's fucking great. Not only does that create mystery, it creates a ton of dread. This movie is laced with dread. I mean, you don't feel safe. You simply do not feel safe in this movie at any point in time. It's like kind of one wild night, basically, in New York City. And it fucking goes, Damon. It goes fucking hard, and people get gutted. There's fucking mutilated bodies. There's all this crazy ass shit going down in one wild night in New York City. There's like little more I could ask for in a movie that has slashing and New York City in it. It kind of gives you everything.
It really does. They really give you a little bit of everything, and the whole everyone's a suspect thing in this film gets, amped up to 11, because you're absolutely right. In theory, generally speaking, by the time the killers are revealed, you might have an idea. Now, again, I don't think, when you look at Scream, the original Scream, part of the brilliance of that film is you didn't know. I mean, they kill Billy. Like, they show Billy getting stabbed, and you're like, what the hell? And, like, you think it's over. And then the big reveal about everything with her mom and cheating on Billy's dad, and all that kind of stuff. You're like, oh Jesus! Like, I just didn't see it, because you don't know the motive at that point. You just know that Sidney's the focus, but you don't know why. This film, and I think all Scream films have done pretty well with that. And sometimes I feel like if there's a problem with the Scream film, like Scream 3, they have to really, really work around history to try to figure out a way to this killer.
Right.
This film doesn't need to do that. This is very simply a revenge film. That's really what this comes down to. They're avenging their son and or brother. And I was with you. At the end of the film, even like there's one part of this film, like Mindy does a really good job of breaking down the prime suspects, and she picks one guy out right away, and the entire film she's focused on him. He ends up being the killer, but even then you're kind of like, okay, but why? And then when they reveal that, you're like, oh, okay, now it all makes sense. It's really well done. Every killer revealed, the three Ghostface in this film, all three that are revealed make sense, and the way they kind of twist and turn them into becoming killers is actually pretty brilliant. Because just the motivation, we understand that Richie's siblings and his dad. But how they kind of twist and turn to make you think maybe it's not them, or maybe it is them, or in the case of Quinn's character by Liana Liberato, we think she's dead. Very brilliant in the first one. We think she's dead. She's not supposed to be there. And it's, again, everything is orchestrated in a way that makes you believe it could happen. And then when the big reveal does happen, you're kind of like, oh, shit.
They crossed all their T's. They dotted all their I's. They figured out a way, and that was like that. Bringing up Quinn. Quinn is Tara's roommate, right? Or no, is it Tara's roommate?
They're both. Well,
it is
Tara and Sam's roommate. They all live.
Oh, they live together. That's right. Yeah, Sam's got a very unhealthy attachment to Tara in this movie. So Quinn's their roommate, right? And she's what does she call herself? A sex positive roommate, right? So she's constantly in the room boning super hard, which is awesome. That's great for her. But she's kind of always off to the side, so you're never really like embedded with her. But even that makes sense in the story when you think about it. It's like There's always some guy in the room with her, but but it's always some rotating guy. There's never any permanency to what's going on with her. Then they kill her, or so you think, in the apartment in front of Sam and Tara, because they use a very incredible device, which was probably the biggest tell I could have figured in the whole movie. Her father is a police officer, played by Dermot Mulroney, Detective Bailey. Her father's a police officer. Her father has a vested interest in keeping her safe. The only thing that gave it away was, and you see this in the trailer, is the whole Ghostface shrine. When they visit the Ghostface shrine that Gail figured out, through her investigative journalism, existed. They do bring something up. They go, well, where would you get all of this stuff from? From police evidence lockers. And I go, well, then it's fucking definitely him, or it's definitely Kirby. Like, it's one of those two, because they have access to all this stuff to create this shrine. So it's definitely one of the two of them. Then Gail throws out a line where it's like, well, you can also just pay cops to give you evidence. Like, that's a thing too. So they try to kind of brush over it, but I go, that's too fucking convenient. But having her father be this cop gives you a weird sense of security, because he's trying to protect her specifically. Well, when you see her die straight up in or you think you see her die, she's covered in blood. She comes out of the room. She's collapsed over and dead. And then the dad is like, crestfallen and obviously like completely like beside himself at the death of his daughter. You think, well, okay, they must not be, because he's pretty upset that she's dead. But you never would have guessed that maybe they just fake her death. Like, that was such a fucking great like rug pull for me. Well, because I was like,
and also the part of the other brilliance of that is that when they reveal, like, when she dies, when Quinn dies, from the very beginning, when we meet Detective Bailey, who is her dad, played by Dermot Mulroney, he talks about his son, the tragedy of losing his son, and why he's so protective over his daughter. His son died. They established that right away. So when you were like, oh, when he finally reveals his son did die, it was Richie. You're like, oh shit! Like, yeah, they tell you that in the film very early on. He said, "My son died. I'm very protective of my daughter because of how my son died."
Yeah. No, I mean they cover all the bases.
They're telling you. They're telling you without telling you, and it's really, because when the big reveal happens, you're like, he told me. He said it early in the film. I'm protective, and I want to get the revenge because my son died. He never hides that fact. We just don't know that the son he's avenging is Richie. He
says out loud, "I want to get the fuckers that," or like I want revenge. Like, I want revenge for the death of my son, so I'll help you out on this. Or he says it. He says it because of Quinn dying.
He does, but early in the film, he talks about like the tragedy of his son and protective of Quinn and blah blah blah. And you're just like, he's telling you. And then when you say, I want to get this fucker too, Quinn never died, so he's telling you right to your face that he is helping to orchestrate this thing. And yeah, that whole thing was just like, wow, that was really well done. And again, the reveal being tied back to the fifth film versus just constantly trying to find new ways to create loopholes for legacy characters from part 1 and part 2 to come back. I just loved it, because again, it tied just to Sam and Tara. It wasn't about Sidney. It had nothing to do with Sidney.
Do you want to rank your, or not rank necessarily, but at least talk about our major legacy characters that come back in this? Obviously, Gale Weathers and Kirby Reed. How did you feel about their turns in this movie? I'm going to defer to you, because you are the Scream expert. You've been embedded with the series since the beginning.
I liked both. I enjoyed Gale coming back as kind of like the narcissistic, kind of fame-seeking reporter who has lived and breathed through this entire tragedy, and continued to thrive because of this tragedy. And it's kind of crazy, because when Scream 5 happens, she's just an anchor on a TV show hosting a morning show. She's found a job, but she's moved beyond the Ghostface killings and just moved into like a regular job. Now Scream 5 reignites that, and so when this film starts, like, you realize it's very much like Scream 2, when Gail comes back and she's just this, she's a shark, a journalistic shark who wants the story because that's going to bring her more fame. And so she's very antagonistic with Sam and Tara when she shows back up. And then as far as Kirby coming back as a FBI agent, makes a lot of sense because, like I said, when you go through a tragedy like that where you nearly die at the hands of a serial killer, I would imagine you're going to probably go in one of two directions. You're either going to be traumatized for the rest of your life, which fully understand why you would be, or you're going to try to go in the opposite direction, which is to help people. Now, obviously, helping people doesn't necessarily mean you have to become an FBI agent, but it does get magnified in that kind of role. Like, at that point, you want to stop serial killers because you were a victim of a serial killer, especially at that age when Kirby gets stabbed in Scream 4. She's supposed to be 16, 17 years old. So that's going to stick with you. So the fact that she went on to become an FBI agent working specifically on serial killers makes a lot of sense. So the legacy characters they bring back work, and they also work well within the framework of this film. Also, and to what you said earlier, they do not take away from the story. They do not become the center of the story, and it takes away from Tara and Sam. No, this is Sam and Tara's movie 100%.
Yeah, and Kirby and Gail act as mentors, right? They use their experience to help Sam and Tara through the movie. That which is it's a great use of the mentor character arc, which is a very typical character arc in most screenplays, especially genre screenplays. You need somebody who knows the lay of the land, and Gail and Kirby are absolutely those characters in this movie. And it's great because even Detective Bailey at one point tries to plant the seed that maybe it's Kirby, right? By saying like, oh, she got fired from the FBI a long time ago. Well, it turns out he's an unreliable narrator. Like the fact that he says that to us means very little because truth be told, you couldn't trust him all along.
Yeah. Let's get into categories because we do have a lot of categories to get to today, Patrick, and we always kick things off here on the show and talk about best performance. I want to, again, I say this a lot when we have a movie we like, but I want to say the performances in this movie were all strong. I thought everyone who returned was great. Hayden Panettiere back was great. I thought Leanne Liberato and was it Jack Champion both did a great job, in their roles as the killer. So again, I thought everyone in this film did really, really well. But for you, best performance, who was it?
My best performance this time around goes to Jasmine Savoy Brown, who plays Mindy Meeks Martin. Now, I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier. She goes on the best fucking film diatribes in this. These might be my favorite. I think it's in my notes. These are my favorite film meta references of the entire series. Like they just the credit to the writers for coming up with these ideas, but Jasmine's got to kind of put them on screen for us. And she really kind of embodied, in my opinion, like a cooler version of Randy. I know a lot of people love Randy. I was never like in love with the character, but I was in love with the concept around the character. The way she embodies it this time around, the way she is frustrated with how she believes she's constantly wrong about her predictions is hilarious. Yeah. I just think she's both like the reason I give her performance because she's able to strike the balance of not just being that Randy character, and the film obsessed character, but also balancing. She's sort of the comic relief of the movie without being goofy. That could have gone wrong. And she just knew how to just strike the balance between being funny, being informative, and really and taking the Randy archetype and making it all her own.
Yeah, she's great. I've been a big fan of Jasmine Savoy Brown. I was actually lucky enough to interview her a few years ago because she was on a series called The Leftovers, and I had done an interview with her around that time. She's an incredibly talented actor, and I really like her in this film. And she does a great job, as you said, like playing the comedic relief in a lot of ways, but also not goofy, as you said, not goofy, not ironic, none of that kind of stuff. It's just a really well put together character. And I love, like, she feels remorse. Like, she didn't get the killers right in the last film. She feels like she failed her friends by not identifying what was going on. And so she's desperate to get it right this time. And she does. She gets one guy right for sure. She pegs him right away. And throughout the entire film, she's telling she texts her friends about it. She's like, she tags him as GF. She calls him Ghostface. And she's right. She ends up being 100% right about one of them. But it's really well done. And again, when you're supposed to be the expert on these films, you're supposed to get these things right. And so she kind of takes that role. And she has a scene in a subway this film that really allows her to stretch her legs creatively without saying a word, really. Like the entire time is just her emoting emotion on her face and things like that. Really, really strong performance from Jasmine Savoy Brown. I really liked it. For me, I had a couple of candidates here, Patrick, but I'll be honest, I think it really came down to one person at the end of the day. And while, this is definitely, we are living in the age of Ortega, I think that this is Melissa Barrera's film. I think she does an incredible job. She really takes over the lead role. Again, she's stepping out, as you said, out of the shadow of Sidney Prescott and the legacy of her father, Billy Loomis. She's really, really well put together in this film. And Melissa just carries it. I mean, she really does carry this film. The weight of the world is on her shoulders, and she does a great job of that while still managing to look vulnerable, while still managing to be fierce. She does it all in this film. And again, credit to the writers who kind of turned her into our final girl this time while also hinting at her murderous tendencies because of the legacy of her father. She really does kill it in this film, for lack of a better word. And she's just, again, she was good in the last film. She absolutely was, but yeah. She wasn't the sinner. She's the sinner this time, and she's fantastic.
Yeah, and she has a lot to carry. She has to carry everything from the last film. She has to live in these two worlds of am I a killer or am I a good person? She really gives a shit about her sister Tara and doesn't want her to fucking be killed. There's a lot of work for her to do in this movie. And Melissa kills it on all levels. She really did well. She was almost my pick. It was very close. I don't want to say I'm on the fence about the idea of her potentially being a psychotic killer, deep down. It's just so new to me. It's so new, the idea that the victim could also be very much someone you need to watch out for. So I'm just kind of watching it and going, okay, let's see where this goes, because I'm not quite sure where it's going to go. But she plays it all to perfection. This really is her movie. And now, let's be honest, it's probably her franchise now. I think she did so well. I don't know, they kind of alluded this near the beginning of the movie that no one in this movie could be safe. That in a franchise, no main characters are safe, so you should assume that they can go at any time. I'm here to assume that based on her ability to carry this movie and all this complexity, that it will be her franchise, at least for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, she did a great job. Let's talk about our next one, the One Testicle Award that we like to give occasionally on this show. Very, very much a homage to the great Nicolas Cage.
One testicle!
And this is our award, Patrick, when sometimes there's a little bit of overacting happening in this. Who gets the One Testicle Award for Scream 6?
The One Testicle Award goes to Dermot Mulroney, who plays Detective What's-His-Face? Detective, why don't I have his name here? I should have it pulled up. Detective Bailey. Holy shit. So I'm watching Scream 6 with a buddy of mine who also is an accomplished director in his own right. And we're sitting there watching. Anytime Dermot Mulroney came on screen, he and I laughed, whether it was meant to be a funny scene or not. And we were talking about it afterwards, and he goes, I just wonder if Dermot has never gotten this big of a shot and he didn't know what to do with it. He is the dog who caught up with the car and had no idea what to do. He's cranked so high. I thought to myself, was there ever a point where the directors just came over, hey man, take it down a couple notches? He was so different than the rest of the tone of the movie. He was he was out there. He was wacky.
In particular, in the final scenes when he's big revealed, he really cranks it up to 11 in those scenes. And to be fair, it doesn't ruin the movie by any stretch of the imagination. But boy, does he really just
no.
He definitely took too many shots of espresso when he did those scenes, because he was all over the place and he was very manic in a couple of scenes.
Yeah, no, yeah, he's no Laurie Metcalf in part 2. I mean, Laurie Metcalf gave it the fucking beans in part 2, but it also tonally made sense because that movie was highly, highly melodramatic. Dermot Mulroney was channeling Scream 2 with Detective Bailey.
Yeah. Let's talk about best scare because this one, like I said, we talked about brutality, we talked about gore, and we'll get into that a little later. But this film really felt like it did want to go back to the idea of this being a truly scary film, which was nice. Not to say that the Scream, I've said many times, like, I love the Scream films. They don't necessarily scare me, even though they are horror films. But this one, man, they really did amp it up in this film.
They did, and I probably could have picked a lot of scenes. There's tons of great tension and dread, but my favorite scare definitely came when, it's part of it you see in the trailer, is Ghostface in Gale's house. Now they show you a snippet of it in the trailer. That's a pretty extended scene. It's actually a scene that probably runs about 5 to 8 minutes, somewhere in that range. And that tension just continually ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up. It's this great technique called good news, bad news. In an action scene, typically you can use this where it's like, good news, Gail's in the house with her boyfriend. Bad news, Ghostface kills her boyfriend right behind her, unbeknownst to her. Good news is she gets her gun. Bad news is she misses. Good news is he ran away. Bad news is no, he didn't. And then and that little no, he didn't is like the perfect scare. Like I don't know what I think it was because the scene extended itself long enough. You didn't know how to feel. And when he finally fucking rushes her and gets her, it's terrifying.
Yeah, it's really, really well done. And that scene is probably one of the strongest in the entire film because it does really feel like a truly life or death cat and mouse situation between Gale and this killer. And also, like when the killer calls her, which again we see in the trailers, he says, it's the first time we were speaking. And I was like, I never really thought about that. Like, it's not like
I know.
Never been the phone call victim. I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. So yeah, it was really, really well orchestrated. Good scares throughout that. So my scare, I'm cheating a little bit because I typically don't like to, one thing I will say, if I had one small gripe with this movie, and it's a very,
okay,
it's that a lot of people get stabbed and survive.
Oh yeah,
a lot of people get stabbed and survive in this film, or shot and survived, or however you want to, like those kind of things. And while I understand it, there's one in particular that kind of bugged me because the execution of this scene was the best scare in the film. And I'm not saying I wanted the character to die. I was just like, oh man, he survived, but it was still a great scare. And that's when Chad's character, played by Mason Gooding, gets attacked in the movie theater that's a shrine to the stab films. Him and Tara are flirting throughout this entire movie, and then they finally kind of get together, and you're like, oh, they're finally getting together. And then like seconds later, he gets attacked, and then we actually see, really, I think maybe for the first time in this franchise, we see two Ghostface together, like in the Ghostface gear together, attack somebody. And when they pop out and they attack him, it was a very oh shit moment. A good jump scare, and two of them, I was like, oh Jesus! Like we know it's two. We know outside of part 3, it's always at least two Ghostface killers, but we don't generally see them together. We see one or we see the other, and then the big reveals when you actually see them together. This one, actually, you're seeing twin Ghostface, and they go after Chad hard, and it's just a really good jump scare. And again, it also works because Chad's character's kind of a doofy, almost like a jockey kind of doofy character in Scream 5. This one, they actually make him a much smarter, much more sympathetic character who's looking out for Tara, who's a good guy. They make him the good guy, and so he finally gets this where he gets to meet Tara and hook up with her, and they're coming together. You're finally rooting for that, and then like seconds later, he just gets absolutely brutalized, and it's a really, really effective scare.
Yeah, I called that scare stab to Chad, because holy shit does he get stabbed a million times. And it is the weak point, not just of this movie, but I think of Scream 5 as well, because one of my bigger complaints in Scream 5 was Jenna Ortega's character, Tara, should have been fucking dead like 13 times in that movie. Yeah. Well, they passed that over to, apparently the great superpower of Scream characters now is that they can take multiple stab wounds to the body and never die. That seems to be the one thing that these movies do that is, I say, beyond suspension of disbelief, but you buy into it. That's exactly why you're doing this stuff. Where are we at here? Is it my turn for a kill?
No,
we're No, we did the scare. Sorry. I lost track there for a second, but yeah. Fucking hell, man, do people get stabbed in this movie?
They do. Let's talk about best gore, because as we mentioned earlier, this is a very gory Scream film, like uncharacteristically gory. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Actually, I applaud it, even though I'm not a guy who just needs gore. I don't need gore for a great horror film, but this one really does ratchet it up. So what was the best gore in Scream 6 for you, Patrick?
My best gore comes from the extended opening scene, which we'll probably talk a little bit more about in a moment. But basically, Ghostface, it has targeted someone, and we'll talk about that someone in a minute. And then the tables get turned, which is you end up being with Ghostface after that scene. You follow him home, or so you think it's Ghostface. And then the phone rings, and he's on the phone with Ghostface. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? Again, subversion of expectations. And they go through this whole thing, and he thinks he's talking to his Ghostface partner, right? It's almost always two people. So Ghostface talking to his own Ghostface partner in the Ghostface voice, and he's like, why are you using the Ghostface voice on me? That's fucking weird. And then you start to realize something's not right, and he leads them on this game of hot and cold, like I'm in the house, and you're like, oh, where the fuck are you? And hotter, colder, hotter. Well, it's getting really hot as he gets to the fridge door. He reaches over, he opens up the fridge door, and his Ghostface partner is in pieces inside the refrigerator. And I mean gory ass pieces. It looks like he was hacked up with a chainsaw and stuffed into the refrigerator. It was gory, bloody, beheadings, disembowelment. It's like I want to say, I don't know, you're far more of an expert than me. I think it's one of the goriest scenes in the entire franchise.
I mean, there's two in particular in this movie. They're probably the two goriest scenes in the franchise. That's one, and there's also a scene later in the film where Quinn's hookup boyfriend, not really boyfriend, but hookup partner, he gets murdered in the bathtub, and we see his body, and it's just a bloodbath. Looks like something out of American Psycho. Those are probably two of the most brutal killings in Scream history, to be honest. That refrigerator scene is intense. When he opens that door and you see the look on his face, like, oh shit, like somebody's turning the tables on me. And there's a great line. Let's just talk about it real quick before I get to my best gore. With that opening scene, where we realize like these two guys are basically film fanatics, and they're trying to finish Richie's movie. And so they're going after Sam and Tara, and then they get attacked by the real Ghostface, being Richie's family. And there's a great line at the beginning of the movie where they stab the one Ghostface killer after his roommate and friend is found in the refrigerator. They stab the other guy, and he's like, I want to finish my movie. And Ghostface looks at him and goes, I don't give a fuck about your movie. And just acts him up, and I'm like, oh shit, that was great. Because again, the motivation in this film is not about finishing a movie. They're getting rid of their son. Or brother, as the case may be.
Absolutely. No, I mean, they give you the clue right there. They don't give a shit about a movie. They're not here for that. They're not motivated to finish a movie. They don't give a fuck. And they really don't, because they fucking kill. They kill or stab and attempt to kill as many people as they possibly can.
Yeah. Now, for my best gore, I had a couple of choices. The bathtub one was good, but we actually don't see the bathtub guy get killed. Obviously, we don't see the guy in the refrigerator get killed either. It's just a really scene. My favorite gore was from one of the most tense scenes in the film, which they do tease in a couple of the trailers, which is after getting attacked in their apartment, Sam, Tara, and their roommates have to climb across an alleyway on a ladder that's basically put between two windows. It's like 4 stories up. Very harrowing, very tense scene of trying to crawl to safety, knowing that you could easily plummet to your death. And the last person who tries to get across is Annika, who is Jasmine Savoy Brown's character's her girlfriend. And so she's the last person to get carried out, and Ghostface breaks in the room and starts messing with the ladder. And she's trying to crawl across. Her friends are trying to reach her. You're right there. And then she gets chucked off the ladder and falls and hits her face on a dumpster and then falls dead. They do a close-up. Man, they mangled that poor girl's face. She really did take a header off that dumpster.
Yeah, I titled that piece of gore The Dumpster Dive because she fucking dives from like 4 stories up and smacks the dumpster with her face. And it shows. It really shows. I mean, I love that they did that because we were just talking about that in Scream 2, where it's like they kind of cut away before the really nasty stuff happens. Well, here they show you the after effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really crazy, and I love the close up. I was like, damn, like they were in this film. They're like, whoever worked on effects in this film, like, you got a budget this time, my guy.
Yeah, you better show off my shit.
Yeah. Let's talk about best kill, because this, here's the thing I'll say. Again, my minor complaint that people get stabbed a lot. Obviously, we saw Mason Gooding's character, Chad. We saw Mindy get stabbed. They don't die. I'm not saying I wanted them all to die, but I'm like, geez, man, these people could really take a stab wound. Now, to be fair, you can survive stab wounds far more than you can gunshot wounds. I actually have a much bigger problem with action films when people get shot constantly. Like, have you seen how much damage a bullet does to the body? Like, you're not
just one.
You're not just surviving bullet wounds. So I will say, I actually know a guy. I'm not going to get into the whole story. I actually know a guy personally years ago who got stabbed like 28 times in a street fight and survived. So it is more realistic to get stabbed and survived, much more than getting shot and survived. So I will give him that. But a lot of the good kills in this film ended up not being kills because the people survived. So I have to kind of take those out of there because we need a real death. So when I say take it out of there, my favorite kill is a non-death sort of. So I want you to go first with your best kill, and then I'll explain my best kill.
Yeah, I had the same problem because I was listing all the deaths, and I was like, well, wait a minute, he's not dead. Now he's alive again. He just got stabbed 80 times. Why is he still alive? So, yeah, I know exactly what you mean, but my favorite kill of the movie is the very first kill of the movie, the opening sequence. We start in a bar in New York City with the ever wonderful, the ever present, the Samara Weaving. Now, no surprise, Samara Weaving would show up because she's worked with the radio silence directors before on Ready or Not. She's our opening kill. And she plays this professor of movie studies. She happens to specialize in slashers. Oh, perfect. She's on the phone with her date who's lost. And she goes outside to try and help her date find their way into the bar. And of course, very foolishly, she goes into a dark alley and she gets blindsided by who we believe is the first Ghostface. And it was a shock. And that's probably why I got my kill to begin with, because she gets so fucking stabbed up. I mean, she's wearing this bright yellow dress. So the red just pops against it. So the minute he stabs her, like, I don't know, at least 15 times in the stomach, like straight away, and then starts stabbing her chest and her neck and all this stuff. She just got totally brutalized right away. Now, going in, you're like, oh, there's Samara Weaving. She's definitely going to die because she wasn't in anything else as far as the promotional parts of the movie. And she dies a bloody, nasty death at the hands of a fake Ghostface. And I wanted to say, you're talking about, everybody surviving their stab wounds. She definitely doesn't. She's definitely a kill. They do say, when they're talking about franchises, is that no one is safe. But what they did instead was subvert the expectations and end up saying that pretty much everybody in the main cast will be safe. So that was a nice little subversion.
The Core Four, as they call themselves.
The Core Four.
So my favorite kill ends up kind of not being a kill, but it still is. And it's just that we know every Scream film is going to have the killer comes back for one last good scare. That's an iconic part of all the Scream films. In this film, Ethan, who is Chad's roommate, who ends up being Richie's younger brother, he's the one pegged from the very beginning as the killer. He's the one that Mindy right away is like, you're definitely the guy. And she's right. He ends up being the killer. And I love that they didn't try to twist it. They just twisted who he really is. Like, you have a suspect in Ethan, but you don't know why until you reveal that he's Richie's younger brother. But his death, when Tara stabs him in the mouth with a knife,
yeah,
so brutal. It's such a unique. There's another one. The therapist gets stabbed through the eye, which is also a really cool one. And I almost went with that one because he actually did die. They stabbed him right through the eye, and he's dead. But the stab in the mouth was a really creative way to kill him. Now, to be fair, Ethan does come back for a brief moment, and then Kirby drops the TV on his head, very much like Stu Macher. She uses the Stu Macher television to drop on Ethan's head, which I thought was pretty good, a good way to just finally off him. But I'm still cheating and saying that's my favorite kill because the knife in the mouth, man, that was so cool. And you can hear him gurgling in the film. You hear him going, It's a really cool kill because he just jams it right in his mouth.
He was on some Glock 3000, and then he eats that knife.
And then the TV dropping on him, very Stu Macher-esque. I was like, okay, that's kind of a cool. Like, I know he didn't technically die from the mouth, but I thought that, and then following it up with the TV was a pretty cool twist.
Yeah, I want to think, like, I think every Ghostface got every real Ghostface, not the fake Ghostface from the beginning, but all the real Ghostface get double deaths, don't they?
Yeah, because Quinn gets shot in the head.
But you thought she was dead earlier in the movie.
And then Dermot Mulroney's character, I almost went with him because when Sam kills him, my God, she goes full stab happy and just stabs the shit out of him.
A lot of stabs.
So that was also a good one. That was also one of my favorite parts. Let's rate this Ghostface. And basically, we're not going to rank the Ghostface. We actually did that on an earlier episode. I think it was our Scream 5 episode. We did our rank of all-time Ghostface. But we want to talk about ranking this Ghostface in terms of who they were, their motivations, and whether or not we liked it. So, Patrick, what about you? Did you like this Ghostface, or Ghostfaces, as it were?
As far as this ghost faces go, I'll be honest, the original reveal didn't like jump out at me as like, oh, cool. Like it was sort of like, oh, it's Richie. Like we're kind of staying in that lane. I think it's, and this is a perfect lesson in expectations. I created expectations that were never going to happen, right? So I was like, oh, the killer will be Stu Macher, or they will reveal that in fact there was no pay dispute with Neve Campbell, and it's Neve Campbell, like, which makes no sense anyway, but I wanted it to make no sense. I wanted it to be something super insane. Well, when you think like that, whether it's your favorite TV show's finale or some movie franchise that you're expecting to end, when you set unrealistic expectations, you get a little bit disappointed. It's no fault of the movie. It's my fault for having these crazy expectations. Instead, what I should have done was sit back, not make any expectations, and been perfectly fine with this reveal because it makes complete sense. Logically, this probably should have been the only killer after Sam. And I was like, when I thought about it more and more, I go, this is actually the right call. So I would rate this very highly. I would rate it kind of up like 7 or 8. It wasn't like a cool, awesome reveal. So I think maybe 7 is probably a better rating out of 10 for me, because the reveal isn't necessarily awesome, but it's incredibly logical. And when you break down the entire film, it makes absolute sense. And they sprinkled all the clues throughout it so that you can't say it was a cheap way out.
Yeah, I love the reveal because, like you, I went in thinking Stu Macher's coming back. They're going to do it this time. He's coming back. But then again, when he didn't, I wasn't disappointed, because when the reveal was made to be Richie's family, I was like, oh, they're actually moving beyond Sidney. They did a reveal that didn't have this was revenge on Sam because Sam killed Richie. And I was like, what a great way to do it. Like, you move beyond the anchor that is Sidney Prescott. Now, again, let me be clear. I love Sidney. I love Neve Campbell. I really hope she can come back for a 7th or 8th film whenever they're going to do this, and I really hope they do end up doing the Stu Macher thing, which I think is brilliant. But again, as we said earlier, you can't have Stu Macher come back if Sidney's not there. It just doesn't pay off the same way. You can't, if you're going to reveal that to an audience, it better be because Sidney Prescott is there. The fact that they didn't do that and they just focused it around Richie and focused it around Sam, I loved it, because when it happened, while it wasn't the big, like, oh my God, oh shit reveal, it was also like the one that made the most sense. And I really, my three favorite Ghostface reveals in this franchise, I'm not ranking them, I'm just saying, like, in terms of motivation. Obviously, Billy and Stu are number one. You know, they had the best motivation. Stu less so than Billy, but Billy with his mother leaving and wanting revenge and all those kind of things. I've come to really like Jill Roberts' motivation in part 4, because she wants to be the final girl. She wants to be Sidney. She wants to become the star, so to speak, and so she orchestrates murders. She basically, like, everyone keeps thinking Sidney at some point would become a killer, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, they're going to try to pull that card, which I hope they never do. But like she did it. She wanted to be Sidney. Well, how do you become Sidney? Well, you got to orchestrate some murders. No one's coming after you, so you're going to fake people coming after you. And so she wants to be the final girl. I love that motivation. And then this one, I love the motivation here. It's just pure revenge. It's very much Mrs. Loomis in Scream 2. Nothing more pure than just wanting revenge for your murdered son. Even though he was the psychopath and he was also a killer, we all know that's as iconic as you can get in terms of a sense of revenge, is avenging your family. And that's what this ultimately boiled down to.
Yeah, it did strike me as funny. I was like, so you're telling me the whole family are psychopathic killers? Like all of them? Like, like, I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I couldn't rank it super high, because it didn't excite me. But it made complete sense. Like, if anything, this might be one of the most logical ones, outside of the fact that all three members of the family were like, yeah, let's do this as a team. Let's all go do it. Outside of that little bit of it, like there was no dissenting voice. Okay, that's weird, but it made complete sense.
Well, they didn't, and like I said, they had to, again, going back to Scream 3, a big part of the problem people have with Scream 3 is they had to really twist and turn the history of the story to find a way to make Roman Bridger make sense. In Scream 4, they got back, and again, I said I praised that one. Scream 5, like, again, I liked, you and I praised the idea of toxic fandom, creating killers, people obsessed with a horror movie and wanting to revive the franchise by creating their own sequel. That was actually a pretty brilliant stroke of genius in terms of motivation. What I didn't like and what we complained about was, like, again, you're twisting the story around to make it fit the narrative that suddenly Billy Loomis has a daughter, which I was like, come on, you're just rewriting history again. But when you kind of move beyond that film and move into part 6, just straight up revenge again. That's really what it's about. People avenging their son. Yeah, you're right, like a whole family of psychopaths, but again, this is a movie. We're supposed to suspend disbelief a little bit, and the idea that they just want to avenge their brother or avenge their son, well, that's the purest form of revenge. And that's what they did in this film. They didn't have to overthink it.
Yeah, it was nothing other than let's get revenge for our family member.
So this film, you and I both talked about this last week, and I want to get in this real quick, is that you and I have both spent a lot of time in New York City. And I love New York City, one of my favorite places on earth. I absolutely love that city. I've been there many, many, many times. And I've been to all parts of it. And also, one thing I want to praise this film for, it's New York, but it's not touristy New York. You're not spending any time in Times Square in this film, thank God.
Right.
This feels like New York. Now, they filmed this in Montreal, but it felt New York. Have you ever been to Montreal? Montreal and Toronto both do have a bit of a New York feel, depending on where you're at. I don't know if you've been to Montreal before.
Only Toronto.
Yeah, I've been to Montreal several times, and it does have that same, just a lot cleaner than New York. Sorry, New York, it's a lot cleaner than there, but it's, again, very similar feel. This felt like New York. So what was the best use of New York in Scream 6?
The best use of New York, and they used a lot of it. It is a great character in your movie if you're lucky enough to kind of have a setting like New York City. But they really knew how to use the subway this time around. It's a crowded night. I believe it's Halloween night, if I'm not mistaken, if the timeline works out.
Right around that time.
It's Halloween night, so everybody is dressed up. They're all crowded in the subway because everybody's going to Halloween parties that night. And you do see a little bit of in the trailer that the gang is stuck in a subway car with who they believe might be Ghostface, because the Ghostface masks the sales of them are going through the roof. So there's a lot of Ghostface everywhere they go. That's kind of a problem in a city full of 18 million people. What they don't show you in the trailer is that the group actually gets split up by accident, right? Mindy tries to get in the subway, but she ends up getting stuck behind with what's his face, the kid killer. Ethan, yeah. She gets stuck behind with him, and they end up in another train car. So you get these two different cars loaded with people in Halloween stuff, and I see references to Jason, I see references to Freddy Krueger, and of course tons of ghost faces in there as well. They use that crowded subway so well to create tension, to create dread, and it's something that's very signature. Now, a lot of big cities have subways, but there's something so signature about the New York City subway. It really encapsulated the danger of being in that space with a killer so well. I loved it.
I also love that scene because if you've ever ridden the subway in New York, people are very oblivious to each other on the subway. Like they
Yes.
are on headphones, people are reading, people keep their head down and ignore people. So when Mindy gets stabbed in the subway, I'm thinking this 100% would happen. If you've ever ridden on a crowded subway, no one gives a fuck. Okay, I'm just being honest. Like no one's paying attention to what you're doing. The only thing they care about is getting on and off the train at the right time. They're not paying attention to you or what you're doing or what's going on there. It's 100% accurate. If you've ever been on a subway, like people do not pay attention, and they don't care about your shit. Is what I'm getting.
I don't give a fuck.
Mindy getting stabbed felt very real. I'm cheating a little bit with my favorite part of the use of New York, but I'm also not. And here's what I would say about my favorite part about this. We talked about it earlier, Patrick, about how in New York you can get lost in a sea of people.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that aspect of this film because every time obviously it's teased in the trailer, the scene in the bodega where Tara and Sam run into a bodega and Ghostface comes after them with a shotgun that he takes from the bodega owner. The police rush right in, and the killer escapes out the back door, and they can't find him. Why? Because you can just escape in a sea of people in New York. That whole idea that there's millions of people around at all points and all times is terrifying because you don't see anything. It's like Where's Waldo?
Yeah.
They did it constantly in this film. They did it constantly where you're lost in a sea of people. They did it in the subway too. It's just a sea of people. And then in the moments, the alleyway is a great example. You talk about Samara Weaving's character. There's a moment where she walks into the alleyway and there's people probably 10 feet away from her on the street, right? But we all know, if you've ever been to New York, there are times where you do stand alone for the briefest of moments. Maybe it's a late night subway car ride. Maybe it's just a street you walk down to kind of cut through and get to another building. But there are very creepy moments in New York where you are by yourself, and it is terrifying because suddenly when it all goes silent and there's not a million people around, you're like, what the fuck? So this film does it so well. In those brief moments when people are alone, it's terrifying. And then when it's a sea of people, I just love that they use that to their advantage, that you could literally be a murderer, take off your mask, and no one would know. You are just gone and never found again because you're literally walking down the street with 15 million other people walking down the street.
No, this is not a cheat at all. This is using New York City as a character. That's how you use it. You use what the environment provides to you, which is complete anonymity if you need it. If you're in a mask and you kill somebody and they rip that mask off and you toss it in the trash can and then you just slot in with 1,000 people that are walking by, nobody can find you. It's absolutely you're absolutely right. And then on the flip side, when you're totally alone, now you're alone in this incredible, gigantic city, and it feels very terrifying to just be alone in this giant city. So you totally nailed it. There's no cheat there at all. That is the character of New York City.
I love it. I love this setting. I just applaud them so much, man. And also, to your point earlier, I don't know if you saw it, they actually did an interview where they said they watched Jason Takes Manhattan for tricks on how not to do it. And so I was like, good job. Like, they actually did. Like, they acknowledged it. Like, we watched that and we kind of learned how not to do a New York horror film.
They act like they watched it. They fast forwarded to the last 20 minutes of the movie because the first 70 minutes takes place on a boat. So they knew, well, what we're not going to do is put the whole gang on a boat.
Yeah. Our next category, Patrick, this is an easy one. You know, this is the one where we talk about, would we give this film a sequel, a remake, or just leave it alone? I think it's pretty clearly stated we all want a sequel. I think we're all going to want a sequel. This is a franchise built on sequels. But here's the thing. Here's what I'll say about this sequel, Patrick. If they get Neve Campbell back, and I hope they do, I hope she gets paid a boatload of money and she does get to come back, because now they've established Sam and Tara as such good lead characters that Sidney won't overshadow them like she did in the fifth film. But I will say this, and I love Neve. I want to, again, be clear, I love Neve Campbell. I want her to come back. But they did such a good job moving beyond her in part 6 that if she doesn't come back in part 7, I'm okay. They've now established good characters to where I actually care about Sam. I care about Tara. I care about Mindy. I care about Chad. Yeah, we've moved on. So sequel the hell out of this, and we all know it's coming. I imagine we'll probably hear about a sequel in the next like 2-3 weeks. But yeah, sequel the hell out of this. But that's the point I want to make, Patrick. Yes, I want Neve Campbell back, but if she doesn't come back, they've done a great job to move beyond it.
100%. And obviously, my choice is also sequel. I think this is ripe for a sequel. I think you've given the character of Sam Carpenter plenty to work with. Plenty. She's got plenty of baggage all on her own. This whole conspiracy thing is not going away for her. Okay. Especially now that it's like, oh, now she conveniently also stabbed his entire family. You know what I mean? Like the fuel for that conspiracy will continue on. And the fact that she's wrestling with her inner demons, she's going to have plenty of baggage down the line, plenty of reasons for more copycat killers to come her way. That's all fine and dandy. And you're right. I think if you do bring back Neve Campbell, you know, it could be a great situation where she's being targeted and Tara and Sam have to come to her rescue. They feel responsible to come to her rescue. And then maybe that's where we finally get the reveal that Stu is indeed alive. Hopefully, maybe, or maybe not at all. Remember what happened with my expectations? They bit me in the ass. But truth be told, this thing is ripe for a sequel, and I'll be there opening night.
Absolutely. Last two categories real quick, Patrick. Can we survive this horror film? This was such a unique setting in New York City, and you and I, again, we're not from there, but you and I have both spent a lot of time in New York City. So, Scream 6, Patrick, could you survive this film?
Boy, I'm torn because I do love this city. So I know the city back and forth, and I can get around it really well. I feel like I'm savvy, and the savvy New Yorkers in this movie tend to do all right. Some of them don't. The bodega owner and everybody in that might not have done well. So on the one hand, if I'm playing savvy New Yorker, I might end up getting slashed. On the other hand, there's something about the city that puts a little fight in you, puts a little grit in you, and I feel like I'd be good at fighting back. So I'm going to go 50-50 on this one. If I lean too heavy into being a native New Yorker, which I'm not, but if I lean too much into that attitude, it might bite me in the ass. If I decided to maybe err on the side of the Woodsboro kids, maybe I'd be all right.
I'm with you. It's weird. I didn't think we'd have the exact same answer, but it's the exact same answer because it depends on where I'm at in this film. If you want me to climb across a ladder on a 4-story building, I'm dead. You just go ahead and I'm hitting the dumpster. I'm gone. But if you want me to be on that subway, like, listen, I love New York. And I'll be honest. Like, I don't really ever. I know a lot of people talk about the crime and things. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I know it does. But I've never truly felt unsafe in New York. Like, honestly,
right.
I don't. But I will say this: anytime I'm on a big street like that, and that goes when I'm in Chicago, when I'm in San Francisco, when I'm in LA, anytime I'm on a big street in a big city, I always have my radar up a little bit more. You know what I mean? Like, I'm always like kind of watching my peripheral. I don't know why. Just always weird about that. You know, like carrying a backpack, or I'm just always a little more aware when there's that many people around me that like somebody could try to grab something and run, or you know what I mean? I'm just a little more aware.
Definitely.
Not saying it's unsafe, because I love New York, and I've never truly felt unsafe in that city. I love New York. Like, I've walked around that place at 2 a.m. by myself and never felt
same.
But I do always have my radars up. And I think that way I would survive. Subway car, I make it. Ladder, I'm fucking dead.
I don't know if either of us would make it out of that ladder situation. So that was harrowing.
You put me in the subway, I make it. But you put me in certain other situations in this movie, I am 100% dead.
Definitely.
Last category, Patrick, as always, is it scary? And I'll go first on this one because I'm the Scream guy. You know what? This one was scary. This was honestly one of the scariest Scream films of all time. I would honestly, I'm not overselling this, Patrick. I would say since Scream 1, this is probably the scariest Scream. There were legitimate moments of tension, legitimate moments of good jump scares. There were moments where I was just like, that ladder crawl, I was just like, oh gee, like, you know the main characters are going to make it, and you probably know one of the side characters is going to die, but it's still great tension. This is actually legitimately a scary film.
This thing is drenched in dread, and it's from the beginning. Basically, you're scared throughout the whole movie. You're worried throughout the whole movie. You don't know what's going on throughout the whole movie. It's mystery. It's intrigue. It's tons of good jump scares. Tons of loud, like, either bangs or crashes or whatever. They're trying to scare you this whole damn time, and they succeed often. I'm going to say this is my second favorite Scream movie outside of the original, like hands down.
It might be mine too. I mean, I'm not going to, again, I don't want to be prisoner of the moment. I want to see it again.
I need to see it again.
It's up there, man. I love this. I walked out and I was like, my girlfriend turned and she's like, so what'd you think? And I said, I was like, I fucking loved it.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun, and I think a lot of people will have fun with it. I think.
I like Scream 5. I want to be clear. I like Scream 5, but I loved Scream 6.
Yeah, this got me way more up than Scream 5 did, and there was nothing wrong with Scream 5 in the grander scheme. This is kind of everything I've ever wanted out of Scream.
This was the last one when I said all the Scream films are pretty good. Scream 5 was pretty good. Scream 6 is great.
Yeah, Scream 6 is great, 100%. Scream 1, great. Scream 6, great.
Absolutely. All right, folks. That's our show for this week. Of course, go out, see Scream 6. Obviously, we love it, so go see it. I'm going to go see it again, to be honest with you, Patrick. I'm going to go see it in the theater again.
Good.
Because I loved it. So, Scream 6 now in theaters. As always, we appreciate everyone tuning in. Make sure you check us out on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and of course, please go subscribe to our new YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead, and we are on YouTube. If you have questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up anytime on email. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rot. livingdead@gmail.com, and find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead, and you will find us on there. And you can also hit us up on our own personal Twitter accounts. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
We appreciate everyone tuning in as always. We will be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.
Peace.